What's happening in Gaza, to start with that, basically the current stage of what's going on, there's a lot more, begins with the Hamas election back at the end of January. Israel and the United States at once announced that they were going to punish the people of Palestine for voting the wrong way in a free election, and the punishment has been severe. The latest phase began on June 24th, when Israel abducted two Gaza civilians, a doctor and his brother. We don't know their names. You don't know the names of victims. They were taken to Israel, presumably, and nobody knows their fate. The next day, something happened which we do know about a lot. Militants in Gaza, probably Islamic Jihad, abducted an Israeli soldier across the border. That's Corporal Gilad Shalit, and that's well known. First abduction is not. Then followed the escalation of Israeli attacks on Gaza, which I don't have to repeat. We've reported them adequately. The next stage was Hezbollah's abduction of two Israeli soldiers, they say, on the border. Their official reason for this is that they are aiming for a prisoner release. There are a few, nobody knows how many. Officially, there are 3 Lebanese prisoners in Israel. There's allegedly a couple hundred people missing. Nobody knows where they are. But the real reason, I think it's generally agreed by analysts, is that, I'll read from the Financial Times, which happens to be right in front of me, the timing and scale of its attack suggests it was partly intended to reduce the pressure on the Palestinians by forcing Israel to fight on 2 fronts simultaneously. David Hurst, who knows this area well, describes it, I think, this morning as a display of solidarity with suffering people, the clinching impulse. It's a very, in my view, very irresponsible act. It subjects Lebanese to certainly to plenty of terror and possible extreme disaster. Hundreds of rockets have been fired, and naturally that has to be stopped. The rockets were fired after the heavy Israeli attacks against Lebanon, which killed, well, latest reports, maybe 60 or so people, and destroyed a lot of infrastructure. As always, things have precedence, and you have to decide which was the inciting event. In my view, the inciting event in the present case, the events are those that I mentioned. The constant, intense repression, plenty of abductions, plenty of atrocities in Gaza, the steady takeover of the West Bank, which in effect, if it continues, is just the murder of a nation. That's the end of Palestine. The abduction on June 24th of the 2 Gaza civilians, and then the reaction to the abduction of Corporal Shalit. And there's a difference, incidentally, between abduction of civilians and abduction of soldiers. Even international humanitarian law makes that distinction. If there's a conflict going on, decide whether to call war or not, but a military conflict going on, abduction, if soldiers are captured, they are to be treated humanely, but it is not a crime at the level of capture of civilians and bringing them across the border into your own country. That's a serious crime, and that's the one that's not reported. And in fact, remember that, I want to tell you that there are constant attacks going on in Gaza, which is basically a prison, huge prison, under constant attack all the time. Economic strangulation, military attack, assassinations, and so on. In comparison with that, abduction of a soldier, whatever one thinks about it, doesn't rank high in the scale of atrocities. The United States regards Israel as virtually a militarized offshoot. and it protects it from criticism or actions, and supports it tacitly and, in fact, overtly supports its expansion, its attacks on Palestinians, its progressive takeover of what remains of Palestinian territory, and its acts to, actually realize a comment that Moshe Dayan made back in the early 70s when he was responsible for the occupied territories. He said to his cabinet colleagues, we should tell the Palestinians that we have no solution for you. You will live like dogs, and whoever will leave. And we'll see where that leads. And that's basically the policy. And I presume the U.S. will continue to advance that policy in one or another fashion. Olmert announced his annexation program, what's euphemistically called convergence and described here often as withdrawal, but in fact formalization of the program of annexing the valuable lands, most of the resources, including water of the West Bank, and cantonizing the rest and imprisoning it